Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, how are you today? And today I would like to explain about methodical history of language teaching. Before that, introduce myself. My name is RODGERS. I'm from class A 2019 at State University of Makassar. Before that, I would like to tell you about the book. The title from the book is Teaching by Principle and Interactive Approach to Language Pedagogy. Buku ini merupakan second edition dari seorang penulis yang bernama H. Douglas Brown, San Francisco, California, Juni 2000. Pada Juni tahun 2000. Okay, next is introduction. In this chapter, we focus on the method as the identifying characteristic of a century of language teaching efforts. You will come to see how our profession is now more aptly characterized by a relatively unified, comprehensive approach, rather than by combating restrictive method. Throughout this book, I will refer here and there to specific chapters of my principal book for background review or reading. Okay, next is, what do the following words mean? The first is approach. What is approach? Method, technique, curriculum, or syllabus? Okay, the first one is approach. Theoretically well-informed position and beliefs about the nature of language learning, and the applicability of both to pedagogical setting. The next is method. A generalized set of classroom specification of accomplishing linguistic objectives. Okay, the next one is technique. Any of a wide variety of exercises, activities, or tasks used in the language classroom for realizing lesson objectives. The next is curriculum or syllabus, designed for carrying out a particular language program. Future include a primary concern with the specification of language and subject and matter objective sequencing and materials. The next is changing winds and shifting sands. As this disciplinary school of thought, psychology, linguistics, and education have come and gone, so have language teaching method waxed and waned in popularity. A glance through the past century or so of language teaching will give an interesting picture of how varied the interpretation have been of the best way to teach a foreign language, some in total philosophical opposition to others. Okay, the next is the grammar translation method. This is a first method. Okay. For centuries, there were a few any theoretical foundation of language learning upon which to pass teaching methodologies. In the Western world, foreign language learning in a school was synonymous with the learning of plain or direct Latin. Since there was, if any, theoretical research on a second language acquisition in general or on the acquisition of reading proficiency, foreign languages were taught as any other skill was taught. Okay, the next is characteristic of grammar translation. The first is classes are tough in the mother tongue. The next one is much vocabulary is tough in the form of list of interlinked words. The next one is long, elaborate explanations of the interests of grammar are given. The next one is grammar provides the rule for putting words together. An interaction often focuses on the form and inflection of words. The next one is reading a typical classical text is begun early. The next one is a little attention is paid to the content of text, which are treated as exercise in a grammatical analysis. The next one is often the only drills are exercises in translating a disconnected sentence from the target language into the mother tongue. And the last one is little or not attention is given or given to pronunciation. Okay, the next is GOUIN and the series method. Okay, Francis GOUIN, one French teacher of Latin with a remarkable insight and foreign language teaching. It's good. The Art of Learning and Studying Foreign Languages was published in 1890. He is credited with setting the stage for the development of language teaching method in the 20th century. The next is GOUIN said about the teaching method that will follow from these insights, and thus the series method was created, which taught learners directly without a translation and conceptually without grammatical rules and explanations. A series of connected sentences that are easy to perceive. Okay, the next is the following series of 15 sentences. The first is I walk towards the door. The next one is I draw near to the door. The next is I draw near to the door. I get to the door. I stop at the door. I stretch out my arm. I take hold of the handle. The next one is I turn the handle. The next one is I open the door. The next one is I pull the door. The next is the door moves. Next is the door turns on its hinges. The next is the door turns and turns. The next is I open the door wide. And the last is I let go of the door. I let go of the handle. Sorry about that. Okay, the next is the direct method. At the turn of the century, the direct method was well known and frequently applied. GOUIN and a few others naturalistic simulating the way children learn the first languages approaches did not take a root right away. Applied linguistics eventually confirmed the credibility of such approaches a generation later. Okay, next is Richard and RODGERS summarize the principle of the direct method. The first is classroom interaction was conducted exclusively in the target language. The next one is only everyday vocabulary and sentences were taught. The next one is oral communication skills were built up in a carefully threaded progression organized around question and answer exchanges between a teacher and a student in small intensive classes. The next is grammar was taught inductively. The next is new teaching points were taught through modeling and practice. The next is concrete vocabulary was taught through demonstration object, and a picture abstract vocabulary was taught by association of ideas. The next is both speech and listening comprehension were taught. The left is correct pronunciation and grammar were emphasized. Okay, the next is the audiolingual method. In the first half of the 20th century, the direct method did not take a hold in the US the way it did in Europe. The highly influential Rupert Coleman 1929 had persuaded a foreign language teacher that it was impractical to teach oral skill and that reading should become the focus. After World War II, the US military provided funding for special intensive language courses that focus on oral skills. In all its variation and adaptation, the Army method came to be known in the 1950s as the audiolingual method. The next is the characteristic of the AIM might be summed up in the following lists. Next is a new material is present in a dialect form. The next is there is dependence on a ministry memorization of the process and overlearning. The next is the structures are sequenced by means of a constructive analysis and a tough one at a time. And the next is structural patterns are taught using repetitive drills. Next is there is a little or no grammatical explanation. Grammar is taught by inductive analogy rather than by deductive explanation. The next is vocabulary strictly limited and learned in a context. The next is there is much use of tabs, language labs, and visual aids. The next one is the great importance is attached to pronunciation. The next one is a very little use of the mother tongue by teacher is a primitive. The next is successful responses are immediately reinforced. The next is there is a great effort to get the student to produce error-free utterances. The next is there is a tendency to manipulate language and disregard context. Okay, the next is cognitive code learning. Some language teaching programs promote a deductive approach rather than the inductivity of the ALM. Some argue that children subconsciously of rules. Proponents of cognitive code learning methodology and on amalgamation of audiolingual and grammar translation techniques, classes, and healthy task of rule explanation. Okay, next is designer method of the spirited. Innovative, if not revolutionary method were conceived in the 1970s. 70s. This designer method was soon marketed by entrepreneur as the latest and greatest application of multidisciplinary research findings. Today, we can applaud them for their attempt to rouse and language teaching world out of its audiolingual sleep. The next is the natural approach. The natural approach was aimed at the goal of basic personal communication skills, that is everyday language situation, conversation, shopping, listening to radio, and the like. Okay, next is 5 of this product of the spirited. The first is community language learning. By the design of the 1970s, as we increasingly recognize the importance of the effective domain, some innovative methods on a distinctly effective nature. Community language learning is a classic example of an effectively passed method. The next is Suggestopedia. Other new methods of the site were not quite as strictly effective as CLL Suggestopedia. For example, was a method that was derived from Bulgarian by ecologist Georgy Lozanov. 1979, contention that the human brain could process great quantities of material if given the right condition for learning, among which are a state of reflection and giving over of control to the teacher. The next is the silent way. The theory of learning behind the silent way. Learning is facilitated if the learner discovers or creates rather than remembers and repeats what is to be learned. The next is learning is facilitated by accompanying, mediating a physical object. The next is learning is facilitated by problem solving involving the material to be learned. The next is total physical response. James Asher, 1977, the developer of total physical response, TPR, actually began experimenting with TPR in the 1960s, but it was almost the site before the method was widely discussed in professional circles. Okay, the next is in Brown, 1999. The following function are conferred in the first several lessons of an advanced beginner textbooks. The first is introducing self and other people, exchanging personal information, asking how to spell someone's name, only giving comments, apologizing and thanking, identifying and describing people, asking for information. The next is beyond the method, national functional syllables. As the innovative method of the 1970s were being taught by some and grasped by many, some significant foundation for future growth were being laid in what soon come to be popularly known as the national functional syllables. The functional part of the NFS corresponded to language functions. Curricula were organized around such a function as identifying, reporting, and tagging, accepting, declining, asking permission, apologizing, etc. Van Eyck and Alexander list some 70 different language functions. Okay, I think that's all for me, guys. I hope you can understand what I say, what I explain about Methodical history. Thank you for your attention, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.